let's open this up. I want to first begin with Dr. Anand Rangnathan and some non-political players. I don't want to go straight into the political debate. Sanjay Jha is also here with us. We have other proxies also from the Congress party, or at least those who represent the Congress party point of view. And we have professional Congress leaders also in the form of Avani Bansal. But let me first begin with you, Dr. Ranganathan. How do you see this? The Congress, as you know, says that this is a gross attempt at building a cult around Mr. Modi and undermining Sardar's legacy.
Yeah, good evening, Rahul. You know, with approving or accepting a stadium bearing his name, Narendra Modi has dishonored not so much Sardar Patel's legacy, but rather, ironically, his own. And this is the moment in the psychophancy steeplechase when the Congress looks over its shoulder and finds the BJP fast catching up. Look, two issues here. Number one, on Sardar Patel's legacy, and the other on the stadium being named after a sitting politician, Narendra Modi, during his regime at the center and his party's regime at the state where the stadium is. On one, the last party to talk of honoring Sardar Patel's legacy should be the Congress. History is witness to it, having shamelessly disrespected him, and no other proof need be given other than the following. Nehru died 1964, Bharat Ratna 1955. Indira died 1984, Bharat Ratna 1971. Rajiv died 1991, Bharat Ratna 1991. Sardar Patel died 1950, Bharat Ratna 1991. The man who helped free Union Carbide's Warren Anderson was awarded the Bharat Ratna in the same year as Sardar Patel, the man who helped free India. They should read V. Kurian's book on how shabbily Sardar's daughter Maniben was treated by Nehru and the Congress. They should read Tara Sinha's book on how Nehru advised Rajendra Prasad, the President of India, to not attend Patel's funeral. They should read MKK Nair's book to know how Nehru abused Patel and called him a communalist. It took 2 wars, 100 million deaths and 60 years for 50 states and 400 million people of Europe to realize a union. That too a fragile one that is breaking up now. Sardar Patel united 565 states and 400 million diverse people in 6 months. That was the man he was. And Congress never recognized this, never gave this man his due. And I don't think Sardar's legacy is being disrespected here, especially by someone who planned and built the world's tallest statue in Sardar's honor and named the entire sports complex after him. Now to point number 2, very briefly, Rahul. Naming the stadium on Modi was entirely avoidable. It is shocking and disappointing that someone who has mocked the Congress for naming not only 49 stadiums and tournaments, but also almost every moving or stationary thing on Nehru, Indira, Rajiv and Sanjay should indulge the same. It reeks of narcissism if Modi approved of it, or psychophancy if he didn't. Either way, it reflects terribly on him and his party, and this decision should be taken back. If you cannot see through a narcissist or a sycophant, you too are one. Rahul, please give me 30 seconds. Legacies are dictated not by the living, but by the voice of history. On one hand, you say you are a fakir and abjure ego and vanity, and on the other, you approve or accept a stadium named after you. What next? Accepting a Bharat Ratna while in office like Nehru and Indira? You might as well join the Congress. You'll do a much better job of defeating BJP than Rahul ever will.
Well, you can quibble about the cult of personality and the perpetuation of it, but you certainly can't accuse the BJP or the NDA of treating Patel's legacy shoddily. That in sum is what Dr. Anand Rangnathan has postulated.
रानी जी ने अभी कहा है कि 500 फार्मर्स को अमेठी में फायदा हुआ, बाकी की जमीनें तो राहुल गांधी जी के ट्रस्ट में, ऐसा उन्होंने कहा है, ऐसा उन्होंने चार्ज लगाया कि बाकी तो उनकी ट्रस्ट ले गई। ये जो कभी गांव गए नहीं हैं, गांव और किसान की जब बात करते हैं, एक ये है और एक आनंद रंगनाथन वो थे जो पार्लियामेंट में बोल रहे थे।
Yeah, good evening, Navika. Tehseen's experience of a village.
This argument, just say that.
Tehseen, this is unfair. Look, no, this is not right. This is not right, Tehseen.
Anand Rangnathan, come on, it's war.
I was distracting you.
And nothing is fair in love.
I was distracting you.
Everything is fair in love.
I thought only Ashutosh is distracted by me.
Sound of laughing. So please say, should trial court be made irrelevant? No, I'm not right.
No, Navika, this is unfair.
Calm down. Anand Rangnathan is responding to you. Tehseen Poonawalla, hang on.
Very calm.
No, as I was saying, Navika, first of all, good evening. And Tehseen's experience of a village is limited to watching Panchayat on Netflix. But let's discuss the larger issue here about what Rahul Gandhi is doing to our parliament. He has yet again, I'm afraid, shot himself in the foot. And this might be a blessing in disguise, as he won't be able to put the bandaged foot in his mouth for at least a week, hopefully. I am simply astonished, not anymore by his ignorance, by those who advise him, like Tehseen possibly. Do they think this parliament session is a joke or some game that you only have to show up and then walk out? It's not that one is running out of Rahul Gandhi jokes. That's impossible given the subject matter. But this is beyond a joke now, I'm afraid. The country expects the opposition to grill and take to task the government on its policies and actions based on logical and rational rebuttals. Yesterday, Rahul walked out instead of braving the field and telling the parliament what is it that he finds so black in these 3 farm bills when they are an almost replica of what he promised in his party's manifesto. And today, he says he isn't going to talk on the budget when that is what he is there for. And it would have been an important interjection by him, because this being a landmark budget, especially on its decisions on reforms and privatization of public sector, we'd have liked to know what his objections are. Why does he plan yet another Andolan in the coming days to prevent privatization, as Congress calls it? Why does he feel the horrendously loss-making PSUs should continue to bleed India dry? Why does he think nationalized banks that are prone to political interference and blackmail and have NPS totaling 10 lakh crores should continue? Navika, please, 30 seconds. Why does he feel that 1825 PSUs, 400 of them which are non-functional, should continue to be propped up year on year by the government, doling out a fifth of its budgetary allowance? Why does he feel that the grand temple of socialism called Ashoka Hotel, a stone's throw away from where he lives, should continue to be run by the government? Why does he think that the 70,000 crore debt-ridden Air India should not be sold off? These are questions any rational Indian would like Rahul Gandhi to answer. But instead, all we get is, मैं चुप रहूंगा, मैं जा रहा हूं, मुझे भूख लगी है, मम्मी ने मारा, मुझे बाहर जाना है. मजाक बना के रख दिया. Thank God that it was Priyanka who went to take a dip in Ganga. Because if it was Rahul, छोटी गंगा समझ के नाले में ना कुदाते.
1 second. Dr. Anand Rangnathan, where do you come in on this, please? Okay.
Do you accept it?
That's fine. We'll come to the rhetoric. Let me get in Dr. Anand Rangnathan. Please, everyone.
Yes.
Let's keep it orderly tonight. Please. Yes, Dr. Anand Rangnathan.
Yes, thank you. Good evening, Rahul. You know, you have the right to be a silly anarchist, but not the right to accept money from or working with banned terror outfits, if that turns out to be the case post-investigation. Being dense, dopey, unemployable, brainwashed, peddler of lies, irrational, unscientific, illogical is not a crime. If it were, all our prisons would be filled with communists. Second, calling yourself an environmental activist even as you support those who are mindlessly pumping pesticides into our crop, emptying out our land of all water, turning our atmosphere into a gas chamber by burning stubble is also not a crime, in my opinion. Making an anarchist toolkit that doesn't call for or result in direct physical violence is also not a crime. As a free speech absolutist, Rahul, it goes without saying that I stand with this brainwashed so-called environmental activist right to carry out all of the above. I repeat for the nth time, yes, we are a democracy and yes, we have dissent, but we don't have a constitution that respects either. Our constitution has spawned draconian laws and articles and amendments that, rather than protect the rights of the dissenter, protect those who violate the rights of the dissenter. Everything is grey, everything is subject to something, everything is primed for offending religious sensibilities or waging a war. And one of the most draconian laws is that of sedition. All governments past and present have used it, are using it to kill dissent. In my view, sedition should be considered unlawful only if it is attached to an imminent, verifiable, palpable threat to India. Let's now take this case. In my opinion, there is nothing in the toolkit that poses an imminent threat to India or calls for violence to the best of my knowledge. However, what if the makers of the toolkit were collaborating with banned terror organizations or were funded by banned terror outfits? Now that is certainly worthy of investigation, and I suppose that is why it is the magistrate who has remanded this woman into judicial custody. Finally, a little about the Congress clowns jumping silly. Rahul, please give me 30 seconds. No other government in independent India has charged and jailed more activists for sedition than them. In 2011, police under Congress arrested 60 tribals and Dalits, including the Dalit activist and editor Sudhir Davale, under UAPA and sedition charges. He spent 40 months in jail before being acquitted. Activist Vernon Gonzalez was arrested and convicted under UAPA when Congress was in power. 8,000 protesters and environmental activists were charged with sedition during the UPA in a single act during the Kudankulam protest. Chidambaram called them anti-national, quote unquote, but today he stands with them. What cannot be cured must be endured, and that goes for both the Congress and the anarchists. Only difference being one has a tool, the other a toolkit.
Well,
Okay.
I think what Dr. Anand Rangnathan is saying here, viewers, is making a distinction. If someone has been found to be collaborating with banned outfits or individuals proscribed or sympathetic to the breakup of India, then those individuals must be investigated irrespective of what their age is, given the fact that we are talking all about adults here. We're not talking about a 2-year-old, 4-year-old, 6-year-old, 8-year-old, 10-year-old, 12-year-old, or even a 14-year-old or a 16-year-old. We're talking about somebody who has had a fairly good education and is an adult in their own right. Yes, doctor. Yes. Yes, doctor. You wanted to make a point. Yeah. You wanted to complete. Yes.
Yeah, so yes, very quickly. So yes, just to complete what I was saying, for example, we all heard Dr. Sumant Raman, he's very aggrieved. But I want to say this. Let us say, I mean, I fully support Dr. Sumant Raman's right to be very critical of the government on CA, on any other policy.
Yeah.
But would he say that he does not merit investigation by the police if the document he was working on, or he was funded by, let us say, Simi or Hizbul Mujahideen or any other banned terror outfit?
That's why we also invite Dr. Sumant Raman. I know a large number of viewers get irritated, but we have no problems with his views as long as, of course, he has clear bond. I'll come back to you. Doctor, I'll come back to you. I'm taking a break. I'm coming right back to you in 2 minutes. Dr. Sumant C. Raman's response to Dr. Ranganathan in 2 minutes. Dr. Anand Rangnathan is also shaking his head. Why are you shaking your head, sir, today?
No, I'm just flabbergasted by the comments of both the BJP and the TMC spokesperson, but I suppose I'll first say what I have to say on this matter, and then if I have enough time, I'll probably delve into both of their what they've said. Rahul, first of all, good evening. You know, there are two issues here, and both need elaborating. Number one, please realize that this is a game of chess being played, and the pawns are getting a bad name protecting their king and queen. Now we know who the king and the queen are, and the pawns are the CBI and the ED and the state police force. This is a case totally unrelated to either Didi or her nephew or his wife. This is regarding large-scale illegal mining and coal pilferage from Eastern Coalfields Limited, or ECL, based on an inspection carried out by ECL as well as the Vigilance Department last year, and they found massive corruption and 9 metric ton of stolen coal. They accused the ECL general managers and security chiefs, and during investigation the name of Abhishek Banerjee's wife cropped up, and hence the summon. So why should any law-abiding citizen be peeved? Her name doesn't surface in the FIR at all. Now to point number 2. This is one of the reasons why perhaps she is peeved, and this is a real tragedy of India. The investigative agencies are not apolitical or independent. They remain parrots, and when you domesticate a parrot, unfortunately it finds its favorite shoulder, and right now the favorite shoulder is of Modi. There is one way Abhishek Banerjee or his wife can avoid being harassed, and that would be to join the BJP. I am being cynical here, of course, but this is the truth. The politicians who are raided or threatened with a raid simply quit and join the BJP. From Goa to Manipur to Bengal to Karnataka, every single politician when in trouble has dipped himself into this Behti Ganga, that is the BJP. Then miraculously all leads go cold. All investigations come to a dead end. In fact, remember when BJP's own GVL Narasimha Rao had wanted an ED raid and had written to the Rajya Sabha Ethics Committee alleging involvement of TDP's Vyas Chaudhary in court, massive financial bungling and fraud of 5,700 crores, unquote, and sought his disqualification over court, serious breach of ethics, unquote. Well, before the Rajya Sabha could act, Mr. Chaudhary joined the BJP, forcing Mr. Rao to eat the humble pie. So all Ms. Banerjee has to do is to join the BJP and she'll be fine. And when I say Ms. Banerjee, I mean Abhishek's wife and not his aunt. Although the way things are going, who knows? But if you give me 30 seconds, I want to address both Mr. Datta, who is the TMC spokesperson, who says, where is the corruption? The GDP is increasing. By that logic, before COVID struck, India's GDP was also increasing 5% year on year for the last 6 years. So he agrees that under Modi, there has been no corruption. And as far as Dr. Patra is concerned, I am absolutely flabbergasted when he says not a 25 paisa corruption has been found. For a beginning, I can list at least 4 or 5 massive corruption cases, Dr. Patra, beginning with your own amendment of FCRA Act, when the High Court found you and Congress both guilty and convicted you. And what did you do? You were accused of taking money illegally from a foreign company, and you amended the FCRA Act going back to 1976. I have a list of all the corruption charges that you have not addressed, including Shivraj Chauhan's 7,000 crore scam by bypassing many rules to award contract to Gammon India. CAG report detailing how Gujarat's GSPC threw away 20,000 crores of your money, our money down the drain. Then you have the CAG report saying there is a missing $7 billion worth of subsidies. So there are many scams. Please don't say 25 paise ka bhi scam nahi hua hai. The point is we are all being relative out here. Compared to Congress, I do agree that you are still a bacha, but you are indulging in scams.
But soon, just to add to the mirth here and the tone, the sarcastic tone, we might need a super-sized hammam. I think that's what we really need, a big super-sized hammam, so that everyone can jump into this really bubbling, cauldron, bubble bath really, if you want to call it. And yes, Dr. Anand Rangnathan, there are more videos which I will show in just a few moments of Chinese belligerents at Galwan. How do you view the doubts that were raised against not only the claims that Mr. Modi made as Prime Minister when he said, "Marte marte mare," and the fact that there were some people who seemed to suggest that we did not use our arsenals?
Yes, Rahul, first of all, what a cruel joke of a nation you have to be to not accept or announce the martyrdom of your own soldiers for almost a year. This is something that we have missed. Those Chinese soldiers were enemy, yes, but they were enemy for us, not for China. Imagine their families. Spare a moment for them, who couldn't even express their sorrow publicly for almost a year. This is what immoral and cowardly nations do. They treat their own as cannon fodder, as dispensable. And this is what Pakistan also did during the Kargil war, if you remember, when it refused to accept slain Pakistani soldiers at their own. And these are the nations that some India support. Just because they hate Modi, it is now beyond doubt that the Chinese weren't expecting India to react in the way that we did. They weren't expecting the bravery of our soldiers fighting off with bare hands, weapons made out of barbed wire, even as they fell into the depths, into the freezing Galwan below. They weren't expecting suffering more than 40 casualties, even though they have admitted to only 4. They should have known better. This is not the India of 1962. Let it also, Rahul, be a moment to reflect on the incredible sacrifice of our own soldiers. There they were, defending an expanse where no one lives, nothing grows, but determined to not yield even an inch of it. One may exhale the futility of it all, but to defend the motherland is emotional, almost visceral. You never turn around, you never bat an eyelid, you march on. And that is what our Jawans did on that fateful June night. You tell me another job where you'd be willing to die for someone you don't even know. Can a man work for posthumous recognition? Their deaths are a burden we carry forever. I felt at once small and grateful too, enveloped by the enormity of their sacrifice. It is unsettling, but when you understand it, you understand that Ankush, Santosh, Ganesh, Kundan, Aman, Chandan, Sunil, Ojha, Orun, Palani, Pradhan, Ram, Roy, Satnam, Mandeep, Deepak, Gurtej, Gurvinder, Jay and Nandu were not some terracotta warriors of some middle kingdom. They weren't going to crumble to dust. They were fearlessness incarnate. And unlike terracotta warriors, they can never be excavated because they can never be forgotten. China may forget their brave, but we never will. Never.
Well, very beautiful sentiments, Dr. Ranganathan. I'm afraid today all those in India who suggested otherwise, who doubted our men and the resolve of the Indian state, must really introspect. They should look at themselves in the mirror and question their judgment. You may be opposed to the government at the center, but don't trivialize the sacrifice, the courage of our armed forces ever again. And I hope, viewers, that you remember this the next time you are once again bombarded by questions doubting the valor of our forces from the usual suspects. I'll take a short break, running out of time. Freedoms are under assault. I was just reading a newspaper article in the Express today, lectures being given to nationalists, etc. I don't know who really wants to build this conformity. I think the conformity is being sought to be built by a group of left-Lattian types who want people only to echo what they want to hear. I mean, the Supreme Court ruled yesterday in a matter that just because you don't like our faces doesn't mean that we can change the bench. Dr. Anand Rangnathan, this very cozy nexus between opposition parties and a group of intellectuals, pseudo-intellectuals, I don't know what to call them anymore. There's so many appellations. But what do you make of it? I think really the opposition needs to be Atmanirbhar first in this country for us to have a democracy, let alone constantly talk about how it's under attack.
Yeah, hello Rahul. I think the problem lies with the word itself, opposition. The politicians and parties not running the government take it literally, almost as though it is in their CSF and circulating all throughout the body. We must oppose anything and everything because we are the opposition. I think the time has come to think of a better alternative. Maybe challenger is an option, or vitark instead of vipaksh. And all this opposing for opposing's sake isn't something new, to be honest. All parties in power today were also opposing anything and everything the government did when the former were in opposition. Now, I have no issues with this when it plays out as an intellectual or a debating exercise on the floor of the House or on TV panels, because being confronted with the devil's advocate is essential to correct, iron out, fine-tune any inconsistencies or problems with one's argument. The issue is the devil's advocate shunning advocacy and turning into a devil himself, metaphorically speaking, of course. Now let's look at these farm reforms as an example. From the Congress to the NCP to AAP to Kisan unions, everyone wanted these reforms. They were in the manifestos of all these parties. Their agriculture ministers wrote long convincing letters in support of these reforms. Their chief ministers lamented the economic loss courtesy big corporates not being allowed to enter this sector. Their politician lawyers wanted the middlemen gone. Asked the opposition then, rhetorically, if it was with the farmers or with the becholias. Their committees deliberated for decades, brought out reports that insisted on these very reforms. Their unions wanted the Essential Commodities Act abrogated. Their technocrats wanted the APMCs gone. Their states started contract farming with imprisonment penalties for farmers who reneged on their contract. But now, because Modi has delivered on these promises, all of them are up in arms. Why? Because they are the opposition now, and they think being in the opposition means opposing at all costs, even if it has been realized that their own proposals and promises have been realized. Rahul, just 30 seconds. But the problem now is mere intellectual hypocrisy. It has started to hurt our security and our economic interests. Because hatred for Modi has transmogrified into hatred for India. They want India to fail, because then they can say that India has failed because Modi was running it. And therefore, in order to see India fail, help is being taken from foreign and domestic breaking India forces. Sadly, with the judiciary not exhibiting the kind of resolve the citizens expect from it on law and order, one really doesn't know what is the solution. And more importantly, who will bring it?
You see, that's the point. I'm glad that Dr. Anand Rangnathan has made that distinction. Sanjay Jha, Shadad is also listening in. Nupur is there from the...
Tonight, and Dr. Anand Rangnathan, I want to ask you. Many people have raised the question of the fact that Disha Ravi is a very young girl and she's an activist, educated young activist, and this entire case against her is a fabrication and is a draconian action by the state. I want to ask you, Anand Rangnathan, just as the bail application of Nikita Jacob comes up, they admit to a few facts, and these facts are very clear right now, right here, and they say the dateline that has been given by them, that on 11th of January, they participate in a Zoom call organized by Mo Dhaliwal, self-proclaimed Khalistani sympathizer, but they don't know what's going to be discussed. There is a toolkit or a communication pack that comes in from there. They distribute it, they create WhatsApp groups, they create email groups, then they destroy it, then they go out and live edit what Greta Thunberg has put out by mistake, and they say that this was not because they had any political or religious intent. It was not also to create war or disharmony. It was just one of those activism things that young students do. I want to ask you, Anand Rangnathan, does that hold true, or how do you really respond to it with the new details that have come out today?
Yeah, good evening, Navika. You know, as the investigation unravels, the modus operandi of these anarchists is becoming clearer. I repeat, to my mind, it is not a crime or unlawful to profess anarchist views or embrace anarchism. You have a right to be an unemployment sociopath. But certainly, if in realizing your batty dreams, you were being sponsored by or in cahoots with banned terror organizations, you committed a crime. There's no two ways about it. And that is what the police have to prove in court. So why are so many feeling jumpy at this prospect? You need a course in law if you think the law shouldn't take its course. And what should all this climate activist baloney? She's supporting the farmers who demanded they be exempt from Indian laws and Supreme Court order prosecuting those burning stubble and harming millions of Indians. Nowadays, Navika, if you switch on the exhaust in your kitchen, you can call yourself a climate activist. In fact, next time, Navika, when you tweet those pics of pakoras you have fried in your evening tea, please sign off the tweet with a clarification that you had the exhaust on and are therefore a bona fide climate activist. But to come back to the topic, it doesn't matter if you're a poet or a climate activist. If you collaborated with or were financed by a banned terror outfit, you broke the law, QED. In fact, as Desai reiterated yesterday, it need not even be a banned terror organization. So the law is even more stringent than what I had like it to be. This, of course, is over and above another possibility, which is whether what they were planning resulted in an imminent, verifiable, palpable threat to India. In my opinion, there is nothing in that toolkit that poses an imminent threat to India or calls for violence to the best of my knowledge. But as I said, our laws are subjective and they delve into the grey. And nothing proves that ironically more than what Disha herself thought what might happen to her, slapped as she would be with UAPA. So she was aware of what she was getting into. It all hinges finally on finding out the mechanic of this toolkit.
Well, very important, who's the mechanic of the toolkit, and can those who have participated in this just claim that they didn't know anything about it and they were just, standing up for the farmers?
Ranganathan, what do you make of this? The police steadfastly saying and very clearly saying that this is a business rivalry. The problem erupted at a gathering, at a party, at a birthday party, went out of control. Tempers ran high, and you have a situation where it has ended up in this gruesome lynching of a young man. Apart from that, of course, we also know that the VHP, the BJP and others are claiming that it's an out-and-out hate crime against someone who was a believer in Ram as well as, of course, Lord Hanuman. So this is out-and-out a hate crime, and they are asking the secular lobby, so-called secular lobby, to take a stand, saying that why aren't you standing with the family when you've done so in the past in the context of other lynchings? Dr. Anand Rangnathan.
Yeah, good evening, Rahul. Obviously it needs further investigation, but I have to say this, that while no single mob atrocity is more horrific than the next, this lynching of Rinku Sharma is a chilling tragedy. Rinku donated blood and in return he got death. The police say there is no communal angle, but Rinku's parents insist it is otherwise. And the strange thing is, those who barely 2 weeks ago believed the parents over the police on the death of Navreet Singh, the man who drove his tractor into a barricade, now believe the police over the parents. So then the police was communal, now it is secular. So what qualifies as a communal hate crime and has now been reduced to actually media's own judgment? Take the example of lynching of 2 sadhus in Palghar. The ready identification of a saffron-clad sadhu is not enough. What if instead the victims were skull cap wearing sherwani clad bearded Maulanas brought out by UP police and gifted to the lynchers with a BJP minister looking on? Would the media still have maintained it as a non-communal crime? Hell no. You cannot cure these propagandists. They have been silent on more than 150 Muslim mob hate attacks on Hindus and Muslims over the past 2 years, including in Ranchi, where a mob, Muslim mob, segregated. Yes, segregated bus passengers based on their religion before wanting to set it on fire. None of these attacks elicit any outrage. Right from the fake church attacks narrative and the running selective hate trackers, they have perfected selected outrage. So we know who Akhlaq was. But do we know who was Banu or Khitaram Bhil or Savant Rathod or Vidu Jain or Ayub or Farooq or Bharat Yadav who was lynched after being called a kafir? Because for them, violence is mainstreamed always by the BJP. Never when the BSP selects as a candidate a man who offered 51 crores to anyone who beheaded Charlie Hebdo journalists, or when Mehbooba Mufti selects a rape accused as a candidate, or when rape accused bishop is welcomed on the streets of Jalandhar by church officials, or when the ex-vice president awards an award to PFI chief, Or when a Congress MLA says he won't work for Dalits as they didn't vote for him. Or when Congress Harish Yadav says those who kill a cow should go to Pakistan. Or when SP legislator slaps a woman entering Haji Ali. Or when a Congress legislator demands death for Kamlesh Tiwari. Or when Yasin Malik is celebrated by Manmohan Singh. Or when tens of thousands collect for funerals of terrorists. Then it is not mainstreaming of violence. Rahul, please give me 30 seconds. You keep on demonizing only one community, only one religion, only one ideology. You keep on being selective to the points of being insane. And sooner or later, it comes back to bite you. This is exactly what Dr. Ambedkar warned us against. But they quote him selectively too. Because if I quoted his views on religions other than Hinduism, they will hate him even more than they hate Modi.
Okay, 1 second. Vinod, this entire group of individuals spoke up in favor of those terrorists who pose a threat to inclusiveness, agency, progress, and most importantly, to the Indian Constitution. Dr. Anand Rangnathan, I find it quite strange that this group of individuals who call themselves secularists, committed to the ideals of secularism, who find no excuse to target what they call is saffron terror, Hindu terror, or Hindutva terror, are today silent or chary about using the term Islamist terror to condemn these attacks. What they are doing is offering very, very anodyne words to describe what happened: killing, murder, violence. Why do you think this is the case?
Yeah, good evening, Rahul. You know, first of all, this is a terrible, terrible tragedy, and it must be avenged by our security forces. I'm sure they will. And my sincere condolences to the families of Constables Muhammad Yusuf and Suhail Ahmed. And it is cruel to see the leaders of NC and PDP expressing their condolences when earlier these same leaders was condoling the killing of terrorists like Wani. They are the ones who mainstream such violence and cushion terrorism and religious bigotry in Kashmir. Fact is that after Modi government took over and the decisive step on Kashmir in 2019 by abrogating Article 370, these terror apologists have been itching to foment trouble, even asking China to intervene. Since the abrogation, Rahul, there has been an 87% decline in stone pelting incidents, 54% decline in terror incidents, 40% decline in youth joining terror organizations, but 48% increase in ceasefire violations by Pakistan. These guys are desperate. Do you remember a few months ago that heart-rending image of a 3-year-old boy squatting on his dead grandfather in Sopore that exposed the gangrenous psychology of the terror apologists and their media cohorts? Not long ago, these same propagandists were tweeting penetrating faces of children who were being used as human shields, but they turned their eyes away from the Sopore boy. Why? Because a Kashmir brutalized by Islamists and not by the fascist Hindutva state doesn't fit their narrative. A Kashmir where Muslims are murdered by Muslims exposes their agenda. How petrified these evangelists have to be that the world will get to know the reality of a Kashmir where those who speak out against Pakistan and Islamic supremacy have no place. A Kashmir whose bubbling bigotry, ethnic cleansing, terrorism and religious fanaticism never enter the Indian narrative, where the human rights of lakhs of persecuted Dalits, Gurkhas, women, Sikhs, refugees, homosexuals were of no consequence till last year when 370 was abrogated, or in 2019. But we have seen all this diabolical game before, haven't we? Of how the atrocities against 500,000 Kashmiri Pandits didn't happen, of how Ayub Pandit wasn't lynched by a jihadi mob, of how thousands never attend funerals of terrorists, of how ISIS flags were never unfurled in Jama Masjid, of how sons of headmasters and teachers of mathematics are mistaken for terrorists, of how the sitting Prime Minister of India never shook hands with the self-confessed murderer Yasin Malik. These events never happened. No one clicked them. And even if someone did, he never got a Pulitzer for it. Rahul, please, 20 seconds. You who overlook religious fanaticism and rationalize terrorism, you better sleep with one eye open tonight, because the families of Constables Muhammad Yusuf and Suhail Ahmed will come knocking on your door and ask you, why are you evading their crying eyes? You can run, but you cannot hide. You need to answer them.
Well, Vivek Srivastav, Rahul Gandhi is writing the real history, observed history, lived history. But the others, his grandfather, his grandmother, his great-grandfather, Sardar Patel, the great unifier, Mahatma Gandhi, who addressed an RSS meet in the Sweepers Colony in Delhi on 16 September 1947. All these people were playing politics. Can you respond, Doctor?
Yeah, good evening, Rahul. You know, the fact is that the Congress has been ruthless, absolutely ruthless in dealing with anyone who professes a different ideology, especially if that ideology pertains to Hinduism. In fact, more than RSS phobia, this exposes the Congress's Hindu phobia. Let me explain. One of the first acts in independent India was to censor the RSS magazine organizer and prosecute its publisher. Did you know? The Congress blocked appointment of judges to the Supreme Court if they were in any way associated with the ideology of the RSS, or even so much as attended the funeral of an RSS person, as Justice Chandurkar did of Govalkar. This is from the book Supreme Whispers by Chandrachud. But this is nothing new. Congress has a history of Hinduphobia. Recall how a Mahila Congress leader made a Gaumutra jibe, same as the Pulwama bomber. And then an alleged post by a Congress youth wing leader called Hinduism a terrorist religion. Recently, a Goa Congress leader named Hindu god Parashuram a terrorist and a rapist. Congress mouthpiece National Herald routinely publishes Hindu-phobic articles, including one where it said Hindu epics were replete with misogyny and Me Too instances. Remember, the Congress celebrates Tipu Jayanti despite knowing he demolished hundreds of temples and converted and butchered lakhs of Hindus. And who can forget that the phrase saffron terror was coined by the Congress and that it wanted to pass the communal violence bill where only the majority, i.e. Hindus, would be held guilty in a communal riot. Last but not least, Rahul, remember how the Congress blamed the RSS for the 26/11 terror attack? Had Kasab not been caught alive through the supreme sacrifice of Constable Omble, this is beyond doubt that the Congress would have fortified its RSS 26/11 theory. How many instances are there, on the other hand, where the Congress has abused Islam or Islamic organizations? In fact, it demanded hanging of Kamlesh Tiwari for making a comment it considered Islamophobic, and its prominent leader fought against the banning of Simi. Rahul, please give me 30 seconds. I like to ask Rahul Gandhi if it is the RSS run schools or other religious schools where they teach that there is no deity except Allah 4062, or those who deny the Quran, their necks will be shackled and they'll be dragged in boiling water 4072-72, or that polytheists, i.e. Hindus, are the worst of creatures 98-6, or do not marry polytheist women unless they come to believe in Islam 2:221, or those who disbelieve in our verses, we will drive them into a fire 456. And would Rahul condemn any Indian religious school that teaches this? Hai dam ya tumhara nervous system silk route lekar China bhag gaya?
Well, hypocrisy, I don't know. The answer is very clear that Rahul is also playing politics. Now, Ratan Sharda, you've written several books on the RSS. Mr.